You're going to do exactly what I tell you, you insolent little black girl, or you can pack your things. Manager Kevin Torres grabbed Natasha's arm tightly, dragging her toward the back of the Elegance restaurant, away from the security cameras. Natasha Williams, 28, never imagined that her 2-year job at Chicago's most prestigious restaurant would end with her being humiliated for refusing to accept a bribe from an influential customer. Senator Richardson had left an envelope with $5,000 to forget that he saw Kevin tampering with receipts, and she simply said no. "Please, Mr. Torres, let go of my arm," she said with a calmness that further irritated the manager. "I will not accept dirty money, period." Kevin growled, pushing her against the wall of the narrow hallway. "Listen here, you stuck-up little black girl. You think you're better than everyone else? That you can lecture me?" His face was red with anger. "You're just a waitress I took pity on and hired. People like you should be grateful to have a job." What Kevin didn't know was that Natasha had recorded every word on her cell phone, hidden in her apron pocket. Over the past 6 months, she had systematically documented every racist comment, every corrupt scheme, every abuse of power she had witnessed in that place. "Let's have a private chat in the bathroom," Kevin whispered, squeezing her arm even tighter. "Maybe you'll understand your position here better after I explain to you exactly how things work." Natasha took a deep breath, maintaining the composure she had learned over years of dealing with men like Kevin. "You don't want to do that, Mr. Torres." "Oh, I don't." He laughed cruelly. "And who's going to stop me? Your little husband? That failed mechanic who can't even give you a decent life." That's when a cold voice cut through the air like a blade. "I would say you should let go of my wife immediately." Kevin turned and paled. From the dark corner near the back entrance, a tall man in an impeccable suit was walking toward them. His eyes were cold as ice, and 2 intimidatingly large men accompanied him a few steps behind. "Alessandro Moretti," Kevin muttered, recognizing the name that everyone in town knew, even if they had never seen his face. Natasha smiled for the first time that night. In 3 years of marriage, she had never revealed at work that her husband was one of the most powerful people in Chicago. She enjoyed her independence, building her own reputation away from the shadow of his influence. But she had called Alessandro 2 hours earlier when she realized the situation was escalating dangerously. Alessandro stopped a meter away from Kevin, who was still holding Natasha's arm. "You have 3 seconds to explain why you're touching my wife." Kevin let go of Natasha as if she were on fire. I didn't know, it was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Alessandro tilted his head, his tone dangerously calm. "You called my wife insolent little black girl, and dragged her to a place without cameras. That seems pretty intentional to me." Natasha watched the scene with growing satisfaction. For months, Kevin had treated her as if she were inferior, as if she were nothing more than an unimportant waitress. As if people like her should accept any humiliation in silence. Now, seeing that arrogant man tremble before her husband, she realized that her strategic patience was about to yield far greater rewards than any direct confrontation ever could. If you're enjoying this story of justice and revenge, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how an underestimated waitress turned months of humiliation into the spectacular downfall of a man who thought he was untouchable. Alessandro took a step forward, and Kevin instinctively backed away, stumbling over his own legs. I didn't know she was your wife, Mr. Moretti. It was just a misunderstanding between employees, nothing serious." "Misunderstanding?" Alessandro repeated slowly, as if savoring each syllable. "You just called my wife an insolent little black girl, and dragged her to a secluded place against her will. That seems too specific for a misunderstanding." Natasha watched Kevin crumble before her eyes. For 2 years, that man had treated her like trash, making racist comments disguised as jokes, touching her back inappropriately, and cutting her pay whenever she questioned anything. He saw her as a disposable black waitress, with no connections, no power, no importance. "Look, Mr. Moretti," Kevin tried to regain some composure, "your wife has been problematic lately. Questioning procedures, refusing to follow simple orders. Orders like accepting bribes." Natasha interrupted, pulling her cell phone from her apron pocket. "Like this recording of you offering me $5,000 to forget about Senator Richardson's fake receipts?" The color drained completely from Kevin's face. You recorded me?" Natasha smiled for the first time that night. "Kevin, over the past 6 months, you've been recorded 43 times, photographed 27 times, and documented in 62 detailed reports that I sent weekly to my husband. For months, while Kevin humiliated her daily, Natasha had methodically built a complete dossier of the restaurant's illegal activities. Every bribed customer, every tampered receipt, every racist comment, every inappropriate touch, all carefully recorded and dated. Did you really think that a black woman with a degree in business administration from Northwestern University, who speaks 4 languages and has a master's degree in hotel management, was working as a waitress because she had no other choice? Natasha tilted her head, her polite tone masking her growing satisfaction. Kevin opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. But you never said. I thought. You thought what? That because I'm black, I should accept any humiliation in silence? That because I work as a waitress, I couldn't have an education or connections? Natasha took a step forward. You built an image of me based purely on your prejudice, Kevin. And that was your biggest mistake. Alessandro watched his wife with obvious pride. When she had suggested working undercover to investigate the activities of the restaurant he suspected was being used for money laundering, he had hesitated. But Natasha had insisted. She wanted to prove she could contribute to the family business using her own expertise. During these 2 years, Natasha continued, you didn't just humiliate me. You humiliated Maria in the kitchen, saying that Mexicans are only good for washing dishes. You harassed Jessica, the sommelier, because she should be grateful for the opportunity. And you systematically stole from customers who trusted you. Kevin tried one last desperate gambit. Wait, I can explain all this. We can come to an agreement, Mr. Moretti. I have valuable information about other restaurants, about competitors. Information. Alessandro smiled coldly. Kevin, you're offering information to the man who has known everything that goes on in this city for years. My wife wasn't here to uncover secrets. She was here to document evidence. The difference was crucial, and Kevin was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his situation. He hadn't been caught red-handed. He had been studied, catalogued, and documented like a laboratory specimen for months. Senator Richardson will be delighted to know that your transactions have been recorded, Natasha continued casually. As will Judge Morrison, Congressman Walsh, and that construction mogul you've been facilitating for over a year. Kevin felt his legs buckle. Each name Natasha mentioned represented not just a lost client, but a powerful person who would now become his enemy when they discovered they had been exposed because of his incompetence. Please, he whispered, the arrogant tone completely gone. I have a family, children. Funny you should mention family, Alessandro said softly. Because that's exactly what you should have remembered before you laid your hands on mine. What Kevin didn't know, and Natasha was about to reveal, was that the last 6 months of documentation had not only exposed a corrupt manager. They had mapped out an entire network of corruption connecting politicians, judges, and businessmen in the city, using elegance as the hub for their illicit transactions. Each new humiliation Kevin had imposed only strengthened something within Natasha that he had never been able to see, a quiet determination fueled by the very injustice he tried to normalize, building not only a case against him, but against an entire system that people like Kevin represented and protected. As Kevin begged for mercy, Natasha calmly opened the briefcase she had brought with her, a briefcase he had seen hundreds of times, always assuming it contained only sales reports or customer complaints. For 2 years, Kevin had watched his black subordinate take that briefcase home every night, never suspecting that she was compiling her own destruction page by page. Kevin, do you remember when you said I should be thankful for having a job? Natasha leafed through the documents methodically. Specifically on March 23rd, when Senator Richardson arrived with that campaign check that you deposited into the restaurant's personal account? Kevin tried one last desperate gambit, pulling his cell phone from his pocket. I'm going to call Senator Richardson right now. He'll take care of this. He has influence in this town, connections you can't even imagine. Alessandro and Natasha exchanged an amused glance. Kevin really believed that his political connections could save him from an investigation that had already involved the FBI for months. Go ahead and call, Alessandro said softly. But you should know that Senator Richardson is, at this very moment, being arrested at his residence for money laundering and tax evasion. The color drained completely from Kevin's face. That's impossible. Operation Clean Plate, Natasha said casually. turning a page in the folder. 6 months of joint investigation between the FBI, the IRS, and the Chicago police. 12 politicians, 8 judges, 15 businessmen. All connected through the transactions you facilitated here at Elegance. Kevin staggered, leaning against the wall. For months, he had felt untouchable, protected by a network of corrupt politicians he considered his friends. Powerful men who greeted him by name, who gave him generous bribes, who made him feel important. Judge Morrison. Kevin whispered. Arrested 2 hours ago, Alessandro replied. As were Congressman Walsh and that construction businessman you admired so much. Natasha continued leafing through the folder, each page representing months of meticulous work. Photos of suspicious checks, recordings of conversations, transfer records, even handwriting analyses proving Kevin's forgeries. You know what impresses me the most, Kevin? Natasha paused at a specific photo. In this document, you forged Alessandro's own signature. The man standing next to you right now has known your every move for months, and you had the audacity to forge his name. It was then that Kevin realized the true magnitude of his situation. He hadn't just stolen from clients or accepted bribes. He had inadvertently stolen from the most dangerous man in Chicago, documenting every crime while believing he was being clever. Please, Kevin collapsed to his knees. I have young children, an ex-wife who depends on alimony. I can give everything back. I can testify against the others. Testify. Natasha tilted her head. Kevin, you don't understand. We don't need your testimony. We have 2,000 pages of solid evidence. High-definition recordings. Forensic analysis. You're not a source of information, you're the end product. For months, while humiliating Natasha on a daily basis, Kevin had been studied like a laboratory specimen. Every movement analyzed, every crime documented, every connection mapped. He thought he was controlling a submissive black waitress, when in fact he was being manipulated by a federal operation that used him as bait for much bigger fish. Michael, Alessandro called, and an elegant man in a dark suit appeared in the hallway. This is Michael Santos, my advisor. He is also a licensed federal prosecutor and was coordinating the operation with my wife. Kevin looked at Michael, vaguely recognizing his face. You've dined here several times. 43 times in the last 6 months, Michael confirmed, smiling. Always watching, always recording. You served wine to the man who was building your criminal case, Kevin. And you were always very polite. The irony was brutal. For months, Kevin had treated these men with reverence, believing they admired his savvy in business. In fact, they were studying him like a predator studies its prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Natasha documented every transaction, Michael continued, but we needed something more. We needed you to commit a crime in front of Alessandro himself. A crime that couldn't be denied or minimized. Senator Richardson's bribe, Natasha explained. $5,000 offered in front of 3 hidden cameras and 2 federal witnesses. The perfect crime to close your case. Kevin finally understood. The bribe situation had not been a coincidence or an unforeseen opportunity. It had been carefully orchestrated to force him to commit a federal crime in the presence of indisputable witnesses. You gave us exactly what we needed, Alessandro said calmly. A white man in a position of power systematically humiliating a qualified black woman, while simultaneously stealing from clients and facilitating political corruption. The perfect crime with the most despicable motives. Michael opened his own briefcase, revealing a stack of already signed arrest warrants. Kevin Torres, you are under arrest for money laundering, tax evasion, racial discrimination in the workplace, and conspiracy to commit federal fraud. As Michael read his rights, Kevin looked one last time at Natasha. The woman he had treated like trash for 2 years stood there, calm and dignified, watching the fall of the empire of corruption he had helped build. What Kevin would never discover was that his arrest would be only the first domino to fall in an operation that would completely transform the political landscape of Chicago, and that the little black waitress he had so despised was about to become one of the most influential women in the city, not out of revenge, but out of meticulously executed justice. As the handcuffs closed around his wrists, Kevin realized that every humiliation he had imposed had only fueled a quiet determination that now proved more powerful than all his arrogance and prejudice combined, proving that underestimating someone based on prejudice is not only morally wrong, it is strategically suicidal. As Michael cuffed Kevin, A deafening sound of sirens filled the air outside the restaurant. Through the windows, Kevin could see a fleet of FBI cars surrounding the Elegance, federal agents entering the front door with search and seizure warrants. "No," Kevin whispered, reality finally hitting him like a hammer. "You can't do this to me. I cooperated with you, I facilitated the deals." Facilitated. Natasha chuckled softly, a laugh that cut Kevin deeper than any scream. "Kevin, did you really think we were partners? That we shared some kind of criminal complicity?" Alessandro signaled to his men, who immediately began escorting Kevin toward the waiting federal agents. But Natasha raised her hand, asking for one final moment. "Before you walk out of our lives forever, Kevin, I want you to understand exactly what happened here." She opened the briefcase one last time, revealing not only documents, but photographs that made Kevin stagger. The first photo showed Kevin at a nearby bar 2 months ago, bragging to other managers about how he kept the colored employees in line. The second showed him altering credit card receipts. The third captured the exact moment he had placed his hand on Jessica, the sommelier, against her will. 43 restaurants in Chicago, Natasha continued calmly. All of them received copies of this evidence last night, along with a letter detailing your methods of discrimination and corruption. Kevin's face drained of color. His career in the restaurant industry wasn't just over, it was completely destroyed. No reputable establishment in the city would ever hire him again. "Your ex-wife also received a complete copy," Michael added casually. "Of particular interest was the documentation of the $50,000 you embezzled from alimony funds over the past 2 years." Kevin spun around. "Jennifer can't, she won't. Actually, she already filed for a full review of the divorce settlement this morning," Alessandro informed him. "Apparently, discovering that her ex-husband is a federal criminal significantly changes the terms of child custody." It was then that Kevin realized the true magnitude of his destruction. It wasn't just his job or his freedom, it was his family, his reputation, his entire identity being systematically demolished piece by piece. "Please," he begged one last time, tears beginning to form. "My children, they'll grow up knowing their father is a criminal." "Your children will grow up knowing that actions have consequences," Natasha replied firmly. "And maybe that will prevent them from becoming men like you." When the federal agents finally took Kevin away, he turned one last time to Natasha. "Why didn't you say who you were? Why did you pretend to be just a waitress?" Natasha smiled, the first time she had shown any real emotion during the entire confrontation. "Because I wasn't pretending anything, Kevin. I am a waitress. A waitress with 2 college degrees, who speaks 4 languages, who is married to one of the most powerful men in the city, and who just coordinated the largest anti-corruption operation in Chicago history." She paused, watching Kevin being put into the federal car. "The difference between us is that you looked at me and saw only skin color and profession. I looked at you and saw exactly who you really were from day one." As the car drove away, Natasha turned to Alessandro. "Has the press been informed?" "Channel 7 News goes on air in an hour," Alessandro confirmed. "Operation Clean Plate, corruption network dismantled by undercover investigation. Your photo will be on the front page of the Chicago Tribune tomorrow." Michael approached with a tablet, showing the headlines that were already beginning to appear online. "Heroin Waitress exposes $1 million corruption scheme, and Black woman subverts white power system in Chicago," dominated social media. 12 politicians, 8 judges, 15 businessmen, Natasha murmured, watching the list of arrests that continued to grow in real time. 2 years of work, 6 months of intensive documentation, and Kevin Torres was the key that opened all the doors. What Kevin would never know was that his arrest was being broadcast live to a classroom at Northwestern University, where Natasha had been invited to speak about undercover investigation and social justice the following week. Law, business, and journalism students watched in reverent silence as a woman who had been systematically underestimated because of her color and profession methodically dismantled an empire of privilege and corruption built on decades of impunity, proving that true intelligence does not manifest itself through shouting or confrontation, but through strategic patience and meticulous documentation that transforms each humiliation suffered into irrefutable evidence for the most satisfying execution of justice possible. 6 months later, Natasha stood on the main stage of the Chicago Convention Center before an audience of over 2,000 people. Mayors, business leaders, social activists, and college students rose to their feet in applause as she received the National Anti-Corruption Award from the governor of Illinois. "It is an honor to recognize a woman who not only exposed corruption, but completely redefined our understanding of how prejudice and privilege fuel criminal systems," said the governor, handing her the gold plaque. Kevin Torres, at that moment, was in the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, serving a 15-year sentence for money laundering, racial discrimination, and criminal conspiracy. His desperate attempts to get a reduced sentence in exchange for information had failed. There was simply nothing he could offer that Natasha had not already meticulously documented. His ex-wife Jennifer had been granted full custody of their children and completely reversed the divorce settlement. The $50,000 embezzled from child support, plus interest and penalties, meant that Kevin would leave prison already owing more than $200,000. "For 2 years," Natasha began her speech, her voice echoing perfectly throughout the packed auditorium, "I was treated as invisible by a system that believed it knew my worth based solely on the color of my skin and my profession. But invisibility can be the greatest superpower when used strategically." The audience laughed, but there was a deep seriousness in her words. The cameras of CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC captured every gesture, every expression, broadcasting live to millions of viewers across the country. In the front row, Alessandro watched his wife with undisguised pride. At his side, Michael Santos smiled discreetly, remembering the day Natasha had proposed working undercover. They had hesitated, concerned for her safety. Now she was considered one of the most influential women in the United States. "Operation Clean Plate wasn't just about arresting criminals," Natasha continued. "It was about proving that underestimating someone based on prejudice is not only morally wrong, it's strategically suicidal." Senator Richardson had been sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. Judge Morrison lost his robe and faced prosecution for corruption. Congressman Walsh saw his political career destroyed and his assets confiscated. 15 influential businessmen in the city had lost business licenses, government contracts, and reputations built over decades. Every person who participated in this scheme underestimated not only me, but the ability of a black woman to be smarter, more prepared, and more strategic than all of them put together, Natasha said, her voice growing intense. What Kevin would never discover was that Natasha had declined offers from 6 different universities to take up chairs in criminal justice and undercover investigation. She preferred to found the Williams Moretti Institute for Combating Corruption, an organization that trained investigators from across the country in techniques for infiltrating and documenting white-collar crime. 3 months after my arrest, she continued, I was contacted by Harvard Law School, Yale, Stanford, and Northwestern. They all wanted me to develop curricula on undercover investigation applied to social justice. Alessandro had legitimately expanded his business, transforming Elegance into the first of a chain of restaurants certified by the Federal Bureau as corruption-free establishments. The brand had become synonymous with transparency and business ethics. Maria, the Mexican kitchen employee Kevin had humiliated, was now the regional manager of 3 locations in the chain. Jessica, the harassed sommelier, had opened her own wine consulting business, with startup funding discreetly provided by Alessandro. Kevin Torres once told me that I should be grateful for having a job. Natasha paused, allowing the irony of the situation to sink in with the audience. Today, I generate jobs for more than 300 people through our institute and the companies we help certify. The transformation had extended far beyond the individual case. Chicago had implemented the Natasha Williams Act, requiring all commercial establishments with more than 20 employees to undergo independent audits for discrimination and corruption every 2 years. During those 2 years waiting tables, she said, her voice thick with controlled emotion, I learned that true strength doesn't come from shouting when we are wronged. It comes from turning every humiliation into evidence, every disrespect into documentation, every moment of anger into calculated strategy. Kevin, in his cell, received weekly letters from former clients suing him in civil court. Senator Richardson, Judge Morrison, all the politicians he considered his allies now publicly blamed him for exposing their crimes. He had become the perfect scapegoat, the man everyone could hate without questioning the system that had allowed him to operate for so long. My husband once asked me if I felt sorry for them, Natasha smiled softly. And I replied, I feel sorry for anyone who confuses social status with moral superiority. Who confuses privilege with intelligence. Who believes that humiliating others makes them greater. The audience erupted in applause again. On social media, #NatashaWilliams had been trending worldwide for 3 consecutive days. College students tattooed phrases from her speeches. Young black women across the country sent photos holding handwritten signs that read "Invisibility is superpower." Kevin Torres believed for 2 years that he was controlling a submissive waitress, she said, walking across the stage with the confidence of someone who had turned pain into purpose. In fact, he was being studied by a federal operation that used him as bait for fish much bigger than he could ever imagine. Alessandro watched the audience's reactions, seeing tears in the eyes of many people. Natasha had become more than his wife. She was a force for social change who inspired people on every continent. The best revenge, Natasha concluded, her voice echoing through the reverent silence of the auditorium, is not to destroy those who have hurt you. It is to build something so great, so important, so transformative, that they spend the rest of their lives regretting that they underestimated you. When she left the stage to applause that lasted 5 uninterrupted minutes, Alessandro met her backstage. "How does it feel to be the most inspiring woman in America?" Natasha smiled, adjusting the gold plaque she had just received. "I feel like someone who has turned 2 years of humiliation into a lifetime of purpose." Kevin Torres would never know that his name had become synonymous with self-destructive arrogance in cases studied at law schools. That his recordings were used as an example of how prejudice blinds people to the reality around them. That his downfall had inspired federal legislation on workplace discrimination. 6 months after his arrest, 3 documentaries about the case were being produced simultaneously. Hollywood had bought the rights to the story for a 7-figure sum. And Natasha Williams Moretti had become living proof that underestimating someone because of prejudice is not only morally repugnant, it is the most efficient form of self-destruction there is. The waitress Kevin had looked down on for 2 years was now a speaker at the United Nations, an anti-corruption advisor to 3 European countries, and the author of the book Strategic Invisibility, which remained on the New York Times bestseller list for 15 consecutive weeks. While Kevin counted the days in his federal cell, Natasha woke up every morning knowing that she had turned her pain into power, her humiliation into inspiration, and her apparent defeat into the most satisfying victory possible, not just against a prejudiced man, but against an entire system that allows people like him to thrive at the expense of those they consider inferior. If this story of transformation and justice touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to discover more real cases of people who turned injustices into inspiring victories, proving that intelligence and persistence always win out over prejudice and arrogance.